welcome to our RegTech Matters event on data analytics in government and marketplace expectations. In the spirit of reconciliation, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander friends with us here today. A warm welcome and a warm welcome to all of you members and special guests. Since 2020, we've had over 18,000 people from more than 85 countries attend our programs, and this afternoon is adding to that. For this particular event, we've had 218 registrations from 19 different countries, 34 regulated institutions, 42 government/regulators, 51 RegTechs, 3 investors, and many more besides. So I wanted to offer my welcome and thank you so much for joining us wherever you are joining us from. Now, rest assured, if people don't make it today, what is great news is that following the event today, everybody will receive a link to the recording of this program. So today we're going to get to hear from 2 of Australia's key financial authorities on their data-led digital transformations, the challenges and their expectations from software vendors, and RegTechs and SupTechs, as well as we'll hear from a leading consultant with over 20 years local and international professional experience in technology and consulting, as well as our good friend Saket Narayan from AWS, who I will introduce you to shortly. Just a few bits of housekeeping. As I mentioned, today we will be recorded and every registered delegate will receive a link to this recording. I would ask you to keep your cameras and mics off for the duration of the presentations. Thank you. There will be some polling that we're going to be doing, one which will happen shortly, and then there will be another one towards the end. And so I'm encouraging you to answer those because they help us with the work of the association. Thank you so much. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce you to our good friend Saket Narayan from AWS. He leads the finance and regulation industry at Amazon Web Services across Australia, New Zealand and Oceania. In this role, Saket works as a trusted advisor to central banks, financial services regulators, tax and other revenue authorities, as well as a large number of RegTechs on their digital transformation programs. Prior to joining AWS, Saket worked for one of Australia's federal regulators, where he spent over 10 years in a variety of significant leadership roles within the technology, data and regulatory business areas. He has extensive experience working with regulators across Australia, the US, UK, Canada, Singapore, Malaysia, specifically on cross-border data analytics, RegTech and SupTech initiatives. I'm now going to hand over to Saket, who's going to introduce today's panel. Thank you so much, Saket.
Thank you, Deborah. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands on which we come together today. In this Reconciliation Week, it is important to recognize their connection to land and water and thank them for protecting our ecosystem and coastlines since time immemorial. I'd like to pay respects to elders, past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us today. Good morning, afternoon and evening to the 200 plus people across 19 countries who have registered and hopefully in attendance now or later when you review the recording of the session, co-designed by Amazon Web Services, AWS and RegTech Association. My name is Saket Narayan, and I lead the finance and regulation industry for Amazon Web Services across Australia, New Zealand, and the Oceania region. I'd like to express my gratitude and welcome our panelists, Fawadudin Abro from the Australian Taxation Office, Darshil Mehta from the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, and Helena Hamilton from Deloitte. I'll go to the panel so they can introduce themselves shortly. Now, in the next 5 years, we will create more than double the amount of data produced since the dawn of the digital age. Data analytics, artificial intelligence and machine learning, AI, ML, consistently underpin the many digital transformation strategies across many industries, from startups to scale-ups to enterprises, government, and research. Now, in the panel conversation today, we will dive deep on how you turbocharge your business transformation goals by harnessing the power of data analytics, people and skills development, effective partnering strategies, and of course, the role cloud computing plays. But first, let me go to my esteemed panelists for a quick round of introductions. I might start with Helena. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Saket and Deb, for the introductions. My name's Helena Hamilton. I lead Deloitte Australia's data and AI practice, which now includes our new generative AI practice as well. I started my career in a startup, a software development company, spent a couple of years in industry before I discovered a career in consulting where I could work on an endless number of data and analytics projects. My focus over the last 20 years or so has been working across all levels of government, including social insurers and regulators, and always about providing data and AI expertise to help drive transformation and policy and service delivery outcomes. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Helena. Fawad, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Saket. I might add, I love the acknowledgement to country. As a migrant of Pakistani Muslims, there's a book called Australian Muslim Discovery. So our people, our relationship with the Indigenous people of Australia predates colonisation with the Macassans, etc. I thought it was worth making that point given the week we're in. But yeah, Fawad Abro, I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Enterprise Data and Analytics at the Australian Taxation Office. You know, the industry term, maybe the equivalent would be like head of data platforms. So essentially providing the technological and enterprise data and analytics, you know, capability for the ATO from mid-range mainframe, multi-cloud, and also look after, you know, the business automation capability in the organisation. You know, in terms of where I was and where I've come to, transformation is probably my field of expertise, but data is my passion, is probably the best way to put it. So over the last, you know, decade or so, leading large-scale programs, projects, etc. at the ATO, and now leading one of the largest data and analytics transformation programs in the Southern Hemisphere, from what I've been told. Yeah.
Thank you, Fawad. And last but not least, Fawad, Darshil, did you want to go next?
Thanks, Saket, and nice to meet everyone. It's always good to talk with Helena and Fawad. My name is Darshil Mehta. I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Australian Securities and Investment Commission. And my whole life, in my entire career, has been in data. That's my passion. I live, eat, breathe data, everything around data. But from the time I started working with ASIC, we have gone on a significant journey of data maturity, and I love every bit of it, which includes the governance, the BI, the analytics, the data ops, data engineering, the whole lot. So looking forward for this exciting discussion.
Thank you, Darshil, and thank you, panel. So to kick us off, I would like to begin by the narrative around digital transformation of taxation. Yes, Fawad, the first question will be directed to you. The way businesses operate these days is changing to become fully digital, as we know. And this is more than transactions happening online, by the way. Digital is becoming the complete and natural system for businesses. But what does that mean? It means that tax calculations, when we think about digital tax, they can be embedded in the software businesses use, and tax can become an automated process that happens as a byproduct of other processes. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, in the Tax Administration 3.0 paper talks about digital transformation of tax administration and the role data management and governance, amongst other things, plays in the overall tax system. particularly with the audience we have today, digital tax, it's important to reflect on this. Digital tax opens up many partnering opportunities for software developers, fintechs and regtechs who provide the apps and services that taxpayers will use. Now, you mentioned, Fawad, the data analytics transformation program at ATO. Data collection is the heart of tax collection, and you have been instrumental in driving that next generation data analytics capabilities at the ATO. Tell us why data maturity is so important to taxation.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Saket. Interesting, I might just provide some historical context here as well. I think the Australian Taxation Office, predating my time, is one of the most mature data and analytics capabilities in Australia. We've been collecting third-party data for a very long time, whether it was ingesting through older systems like standard business reporting, our first iteration of that, through an API-driven approach to data exchange, or through SFTP exchanges, and matching data. So triangulating what we know about a taxpayer with third-party data, lifting the fidelity of that data and using it ethically, I might add, to just make it easier to comply, whether it be through pre-filling or nudge messaging, etc. And that's something we've been doing for over 2 decades. When you look at the exponential growth in that capability, the need for us to transform was quite clear. So not only are we talking about the need to modernize some of our, if we call it legacy, but some of this technology is still quite new, on-prem infrastructure, but also some of our practices as well. So the transformation program I'm leading, it's co-led. And one of the things I love about it is it's value driven. So while we are refreshing technology as we go, we've also got a business sponsor, Adam O'Grady, who represents, our individuals and intermediaries area. But then we've also got Emma Tobias, who's representing our small to medium businesses area. And that's really about how do we take the data sets that we may bring in through special purpose acquisition powers currently, or that we've just legislated, such as the gig economy data. Some of you may be familiar with the sharing economy legislation, and use them as the golden thread to then prove a new paradigm that works at scale and that can hyperscale as required. For context, I think we were at, in 2018, about 1 billion rows of data ingested a year. And I think the last report I saw in around 2020, we hit 20 billion rows. So the growth really is exponential, and the need for us to modernize into a more iterative, evergreen kind of state that kind of unshackles us in some ways, creates new problems, of course, as well, but kind of pivots us towards thinking about the future, and also creates this bedrock of foundational capability that can provide future analytical products, and that's kind of what the phase of the program that we're in now is really at that foundational layer, and it's big. It's big, bad, and ugly is probably the best way to put it. Very exciting because the opportunity is immense, and it really is about moving towards that low touch, no touch paradigm for taxpayers, using data to provide insights in how we drive good behavior. And then, if I can just put all of that tech and data stuff aside, the purpose of what we're doing is really important. So if you think about, we had the Honourable Wayne Swan present to the ATO senior executive staff, I think it was late last year, and he talked about how tax civilizes society, right? And what I like to think of it is, it's not just the development of tax law, but it's the equitable application of it, right? So when we talk about a data and analytics transformation program, it's not just about technology, it's not just about the data itself, but it's also how we ethically and equitably apply certain approaches to ensure that we're kind of getting the right outcome for Australia.
Thanks, Fawad. Great insights there, not just on the technology, but I guess more importantly, taking a holistic approach to developing that culture and fit for purpose business processes around it. Now, Darshil, based on what Fawad just mentioned, a couple of themes there: the big, bad, and ugly, and the exponential growth in data volumes, and the need to match it with the right organizational capabilities. Now, when I think about financial services regulators around the world are grappling with that explosion in data volumes, the new forms of innovation such as digital assets or buy now, pay later, which, by the way, is not so new anymore. But there are many examples of new products entering the market. What does it mean for a financial services regulator to be data-led, or is it data-informed? How do you think about this?
Yeah, look, I think Fawad laid out some really good foundations there. And to be honest, along with industry and other domestic and international agencies, ASIC too is on data journey. And what I mean by that it's the process that takes data, large volume of data, and deliver meaningful outcomes. We just have to go with the flow. ASICs, we've developed an overarching data strategy which outlines our vision to harness our data assets and analytical capabilities and enable data-informed regulatory decisions. That's the core of it, that we are not just collecting the data, but we are using that for regulatory decisions. At an organization level, we are implementing our data strategy, which allows us to collect more and better data to systematically enhance our regulatory work, which will help in integration with regulated entities system itself, machine readable regulation, data sharing between government agencies, as well as trying out some of the latest and greatest technologies like natural language processing for document, audio, and video and image data. We are also using data to prioritize our regulatory activities, which involves early detection of fraud and emerging threats and harms, or enhancing and auditing of market conduct. We use data to automate our internal processes, how can we automate the integration of data assets, workflows, and dashboards, as well as automated internal and external reporting. But by doing all that, we are ensuring that we maintain the high standards for privacy, information security, and data governance on how we store, use, manage, and protect data. So we are also on the path of fully harnessing the benefits of new and sophisticated technology to drive more efficient, informed, and targeted regulation. And we will continue to invest in the technology to become leading digitally enabled and data-informed regulator. We are especially interested in improving the way we collect, use, share information, and how we can use digital technologies to drive more efficient and proportionate and targeted regulation. I think the increased conformity of data will enable ASIC to maximize the utility of our analytical capability.
Thank you. Thank you. Sounds like the AI/ML-led supervision and regulation to be more streamlined and targeted in your regulatory approach seems to be the focus. Would that be a fair summary?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
Excellent. Fantastic. I might go to Helena. Helena, in your role, you consult to executives across many organizations, and I guess a mixture of public and commercial sector entities, and particularly around approaches on how you devise a successful data analytics-led transformations. What are the do's and the don'ts? In the audience today, we have a large number of RegTechs who are interested in showcasing their propositions to government, to regulators, to the regulated entities. I'm just curious, what would be your advice in terms of a good partnering model when working with the broad spectrum of government entities, regulators, and the regulated?
So, Kat, I have a couple of thoughts on that. I think one thing I'm sure a lot of us have learned is that government's expectations when you're partnering into government is that you are sharing knowledge and insight and information rather than sort of bringing a snake oil salesperson approach and trying to sell something. So I'd share that up front. A couple of other things that I've learned along the way. First of all, context is everything, and any good partnering model starts with understanding each other's context, where each other's coming from, and being clear on each other's strengths. My learning has been that it's really important to understand that government agencies in particular are almost always under pressure to do more with less. So pressure to improve outcomes, but at the same time, cutting costs without losing jobs and providing evidence of value for money and, you know, spending the public dollar in the right way. So specifically with, you know, partnering with government, there's other factors as well where there's, you know, more generally a lower appetite for risk. The number and complexity of legacy systems can be quite vast, you know, changing regulation and compliance requirements obviously apply and so forth. That's all part of the context that's really important to consider in a partnering model, and the importance of just tailoring an approach and not to view it as a one-way transaction or one-way provision of a service or a product, but being prepared to play to each other's strengths. I think one example that I draw on would be just thinking about how to tap into the vast expertise that sits within government without necessarily bringing the expectation that individuals be full-time and dedicated to driving project outcomes with you. You know, often there are people with deep expertise in government. I regularly work with teams who have PhDs in a field of data science or geospatial analytics or behavioural psychology and the like, but they don't necessarily have the capacity to step aside from their day job and to deliver a RegTech capability or implement a trust framework. So just need to consider how to leverage that expertise that sits within government without over-indexing on the capacity that you expect to get from them. I think the second and sort of final point I'd make, Saket, is just making sure that as a RegTech provider or as a consultant that we are cognizant of the obligation that government has to deliver an outcome. And this applies more and more in the private sector as well. I think the more astute we can be as service and product providers on being able to articulate the problem we are solving for, the more it's going to resonate with senior stakeholders who are funding the program or the commissioners or the ministers who endorse it. So, you know, as an example, data sharing is a capability that's often pitched in government, in private sector, and there are many technology vendors that help solve for data sharing. But data sharing in itself is not an issue on the minds of executives. It's just one of many capabilities that are needed. So I think, you know, to take one use case, the issue could be about driving a multi-agency response to a climate event, a bushfire or a flood that requires central government to work with local police, the Defence Force, hospitals, Department of Transport, etc., to respond to that event. Yes, they need a data sharing capability and technologies to do all of this, but the outcome is really about enabling a multi-agency response and recovery. So my experience there is just when connecting at an executive level, they're more likely to be interested in seeing a particular technology being showcased or demoed if it's clearly connected to a government issue and outcome. And Fawad, I think you called it value driven. It has to be connected in that way. So yeah, that's a few learnings from my end.
That's very, very insightful, Helena. And I might actually come back to both Darshil and Fawad to also share their perspectives in terms of marketplace expectations and the do's and don'ts, particularly when engaging with government. But I'll do so later. Now, I might just slight change of track here, and I'll go to you, Fawad. A couple of months ago, we had a conversation around the need for speed in decision making. And sometimes I think the way you described it, and I wanted you to expand on that term with the audience today, I think you described it as analysis paralysis, and how organizations sometimes can really spend a lot of time on the undifferentiated heavy lifting, a term that we like to use a lot here at Amazon on how we help customers sort of minimize or reduce that undifferentiated heavy lifting. Can you expand on that for the audience today? And also, how do you minimize the undifferentiated heavy lifting as well as infuse high velocity decision making, particularly on that large scale program that you're running with at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously layers of decision making here, right? In a large scale government organization or any large political organization, you know, and what I like to think about it, you know, in terms of the need to increase velocity and minimize risk, right, is kind of at the heart of it. So if we think about, you know, some of the legislative paradigms and If we use some of the new data sets that we may want to ingest or organize, curate, use, etc. Obviously, in those circumstances, how we actually engage with industry is going to be quite considered. If there's a legislative paradigm in how we interact with industry or with whoever we're exchanging data with, you want to ensure that there is a really strong, not just governance kind of lens, but I would argue there's an ethical lens there as well. So our second commissioner, Jeremy Hirsch, and in one of his speeches more recently talked about, treat data like uranium, right? Whereas I remember hearing Christian Nellison from NAB, he described data like electricity, right? So really diverse paradigms there. But for us, if we're going to collect data, the question of what we can do with it is always followed with, but should we, right? There's always an ethical conversation around that. And in those circumstances, when we're having that conversation, you want decision-making to be considered and slow. Now, when it comes to programmatic delivery and large-scale transformation, obviously, that's a different kind of decision-making we're talking about, right? How do I configure a service to operate in a certain way? Which service do I use if I'm using cloud-native tooling or SaaS, right? And part of why we've moved away from that on-prem COTS product paradigm is because we want to accelerate, right? And so pushing decision-making down, to steal an Amazonian, to paraphrase some of you guys, is it a two-way door decision or a one-way door decision, right? And what I talk about with my team is what's the minimum viable data we need to make a good decision versus a sound decision. Now, for those who've studied logic, the definitional difference between good and sound is quite vast. Sound is where all the premises are true and they support the conclusion completely, i.e., we're in the pursuit of truth and we're not going to make a decision until we have the absolute truth here, right? In most circumstances, when you're dealing with cloud, and part of why you've moved to the cloud is because you know that you can make decisions today that won't cost you too much later, right? And how do you build a culture in your team that is quite open to that paradigm? That's part of the challenge, right? Is taking the people on the journey who have been working in a certain way, whether it's a data scientist working with a certain tool through to a data engineer or a software engineer who now is saying, well, how you interact with this system, let alone how you build this system, is slightly different. You've got to have a different mindset here. And so for me, it's around, articulate the cost, keep it simple, articulate the value, right, within a frame of reference, and tell me the risk versus opportunity. And is it a two-way door or a one-way door decision? So really simplifying that for my team has enabled me to really delegate downward some of those more point decisions while still working towards a target state architecture, for example, right? But you could apply that kind of approach to many things. Transformational programs, they're change programs first and foremost. And anyone who tells you it's process or tech first, I saw a post on LinkedIn recently, and someone was like, it's not people, process, and tech, it's process, people, and tech. And I was like, first of all, that's semantics, right? Second of all, I totally disagree. If you're not thinking about your people and their mindset first, right, and how they make decisions, because I would argue we were really outcome focused as an industry, right? And I like to kind of scale it back and go, maybe we should be decision focused. How do we make good decisions? When do we need to make sound decisions? When are we accepting of bad decisions, right? And if you can overlay that cost, value, risk paradigm and inculcate that in your behavior, right, of your teams and your program or whatever it is that you're trying to do, I think you start to see that cultural shift, which is, it's not that you embrace risk, recklessly. It's the right level of governance, right? It's right sizing it. It's, being precise about our decisions as opposed to just making decisions based on simply one set of data. There's a bit of intuition there that you want your people to have.
Wow, that's quite a mental model. I might actually pause my next line of question, and I might just go to Darshil and Helena if you wanted to weigh in on that if there's a disagreement or slightly different take on the cost, value, and risk paradigm. I guess what we're talking about ultimately is how do you drive that high velocity decision making? Are there any views from you, Darshil or Helena, that you wanted to add in?
I'd love to offer up an opposing view. However, I completely am aligned with the cost, value, risk paradigm that you described, Fawad, and it's something that as consultants we're constantly weighing up. You know, we're often asked to be laser sharp on what we're trying to achieve. Is it a reduction of cost? Is it an increase of value? Is it a reduction of risk and mapping to that paradigm? So it certainly resonates with me.
Yeah, look, I'll echo. I quite like Fawad's methodology. He articulated really well because I strongly believe that people comes first, in my opinion. There are technologies, there are solutions, there are risks to the organization, there is value. But if you're not putting people first, then what are we doing? But then thinking about cost, value, and risk, I agree with. I think we all three are aligned there. I don't have a different opinion there, really.
Fantastic. I like your reference to the one-way, two-way door decision-making mental model. For those of you who are not familiar with this is a metaphor for fast decision-making, efficient decision-making that we use extensively here at Amazon. And also for your point around how do you minimize the undifferentiated heavy lifting and the role cloud computing in general plays with that as a key pillar for driving business transformation across many industries, not just finance industries, but across many industries with its benefits around agility, security, and to your point, quick experimentation, the ability to try something new, something quickly. So that's been very helpful. Now, changing topics again, Darshil, RegTech for government and regulators is also described as SupTech or supervisory technology. Now, as we know, a large number of the SupTech solutions are focused on data ingestion, data science, data analytics, machine learning to derive meaningful insights, whether it's financial supervision, enforcement, compliance functions, or prudential regulation, you name it. Talk to us about some of the RegTech, SupTech use cases that are top of mind for a financial services regulator.
So through these initiatives, we always intend to have see a better outcome for consumers. We also want to have fully informed and data-based decisions. And some of the common examples that we have seen and we are seeing again and again is regulatory reporting. Now, that has been historically done a variety of ways, and now it's getting more streamlined. Compliance checking, compliance workflow, breach monitoring, analytics services. These are some of the classic example of those solutions. A few years ago, ASIC tried, and this is predated my time at ASIC, where we tried a couple of natural language processing use cases to identify the promotion of concerns for financial and credit services or phone sales practices for insurance. Lately, I saw some of the good examples of reviewing the product disclosure statements because they are generally large, thick PDF files, and humanly, it's not possible to read each and every word in a quickest possible way, where NLP could be a good solution for that. Then there are financial advice filed. There are a lot of financial advice happening. Then there is financial reporting. There is prospectus review. So these are some of the use cases and trials that we see over and over. And the good thing is that technology has evolved lately so much that adapting these trials are becoming incredibly simple. We participated in Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources latest Business Research and Innovation Initiative, which was a RegTech round. And we thought we could throw in an idea to use the RegTech to solve challenges across government agencies. Sorry, it seems my room's light has gone off, so I'll have to do some wave dance here. So to make the lights on.
No problems.
So ASIC's selected challenge explores potential use of using technology to help identify and assess poor market disclosure by listed company. So we embark on RegTech Innovation Initiative for the very same reasons, and hopefully we'll be able to hear some news in a very near future.
They're brilliant examples, Darshil. If I can ask a follow-up question, ASIC leads the efforts in promoting the adoption of RegTechs in Australia, I guess from a regulatory agency perspective, particularly with your innovation hub, the quarterly regulatory liaison industry forums, and many other initiatives that you drive with the industry. I guess my question is, how do you think, both from a regulators and the regulated entity perspective, in terms of promoting that awareness of RegTech? So when I talk to a lot of the RegTech founders and CEOs, the question is around awareness, and how do they get an opportunity to, I guess, showcase these services to government, all parts of government. What's your advice? What could they do more? What could government or regulators could do more in this space?
So ASIC is committed to promoting innovation without compromising the fundamental principles of financial services regulation or the licensing process as reflected in strategic objectives. As you said, we have an innovation hub. It's a dedicated function within the organization that provides a practical support to startups or scale-ups as they navigate through the financial regulatory system in this country. And we provide informal assistance to financial technology businesses on the regulatory obligation, explaining them Australia's overarching regulatory framework, and as appropriate, option for relating to relief powers such as Commonwealth government's enhanced regulatory sandbox. So there are a variety of ways by which entities can engage us through our innovation hub. We remain open to all well-prepared entities demonstrating or explaining their services via the innovation hub. We are also open for organized entities to discuss their questions around RegTech, again, via Innovation Hub. And we look at the opportunities for applications and technologies such as digital marketplace or analytics work. I'm being a data practitioner. I'm constantly on lookout for what are some of the really good innovations happening in industry, which could help in this area. And additionally, we are also part of the GFIN, which stands for Global Financial Innovation Network, and have led the report via RegTech stream of endorsement of RegTech and found that we are consistent with our peers internationally as well.
Thank you, Darshil. That's very helpful. You touched on the innovations happening in the industry, and I might go to Helena. Helena, I feel like we can't do justice to this webinar if we don't touch on the topic of generative AI. And I'm mindful of time, so I just thought we should cover it now before we run out of time. Now, before I go to you, at Amazon, we have been using machine learning for the last 20 years, from our product recommendations to search on Amazon.com. And we support tens of thousands of customers globally with their data analytics, AI, ML-led transformations. Generative AI has clearly caught the attention of many in the recent times. And you mentioned that you now have a generative AI practice. Talk to us about what goes through your mind when you think of generative AI use cases in the industry, and how do you help the industry?
Yeah, Saket, how much time have we got? It's
clearly not enough, but let's give it a go.
It's definitely a topic that we're seeing a lot of interest around and a lot of activity and chatter in the market. I think maybe just to contextualize a little bit before I kind of go to use cases, we've done some research around this, and the highest use of generative AI so far is still amongst students, young professionals and creative workers. So we've started calling that cohort Generation AI. And we expect, that cohort, in similar ways that they've taken other technologies forward, to continue to be leading the charge. So while there's a really high level of public interest in generative AI, if we look at it more broadly across the business landscape, there's only about 2% of Australian business that are using generative AI at the moment. And I apologies for the people who are from other countries on the call. I don't have the stats there, but you know, I think just compared with, you know, other more mature technologies, roughly 50% of Australian businesses are using cloud technologies, about a quarter of them some form of cybersecurity software. So we're definitely early on as far as adoption rates go. But that said, I would say that just engaging with business and governments at an exec level, we're already moving well beyond sort of the fluency and the 101 type conversations and into pilots and experiments. There's such a strong interest in federal and state governments around finding what that entry point is for generative AI, or the killer use case, if you like. We see examples coming through daily. A recent one from a colleague of mine working with the state government on a Gen AI use case to develop a public-facing chatbots that create a summary of obligations and compliance requirements based on a plain English prompt. For example, if someone was to ask, what does it take to become a hairdresser in the state of Victoria, the chatbot would provide a summary guide outlining the training and licensing requirements and suggestions on business registration and so forth. And there are lots and lots of examples like this. But because of the momentum and how fast this is moving, in parallel, as well as searching for the killer use case, we're seeing a lot of teams also just experimenting with Gen AI models to see where it takes them. I think in terms of where we're likely to see adoption, the most immediate disruption and therefore the areas most likely to pivot into early adoption are the really data and insight intensive industries like financial services and media and telecommunications and the like. But, you know, I think across the board, whether organisations are running experiments or looking for killer use case, one thing that we're really helping our clients with is weighing up the effort to generate the analysis or content that generative can help with versus the effort that's required to validate the results. So, for example, if you're a lawyer and you need a head start on writing a contract, you're really well placed to save time using generative AI, and importantly, you're well placed to validate the outputs that a large language model might help you with. However, if you're not a lawyer and you're looking for a draft contract for a client in your new startup business, then Gen AI is less attractive because of the effort required to validate the output. So something we're urging our clients to keep in mind, weighing up that effort to generate versus effort to validate. But Saket, you also mentioned risks and concerns. I think it would be incomplete not to sort of touch on that. I'm sure everybody has heard about bias that can be inherent in any algorithm based on bias in the source data and model creep and those sorts of things. And this is where the term hallucinations has come from, where, and I'm sure we've all seen it playing around in you know, various generative AI models, but content from a Gen AI model that is presented with 100% confidence, regardless of whether it's right or not. So something to watch out for. Equally, data privacy, security, IP ownership is a really hot topic at the moment as well. There's several court cases in Europe that are yet to land and probably take some time to play out. They're all things that will continue to be looked at and no doubt solved for, but certainly important to keep front of mind for anyone embarking on Gen AI use cases. I think just to round out, for those that are calling the emergence of Gen AI as the iPhone moment, in a lot of ways, I would agree. I think it's a tech that's going to fundamentally change how we live and work, but there's a big difference to the iPhone in that the speed at which Gen AI is moving, it's weeks and months, not years. So, yeah, it's a real watch this space.
I might just add, Saket, that was amazing, Helena. I just took notes as you were speaking. Felt like I was learning as you were speaking there. I might steal that line, which is the effort to generate versus the effort to validate, right? Because the hype cycle is absolutely well and truly there, and trying to get people to rein their horses and actually understand, you know, LLM in general, you know, and for those in data and analytics, machine learning and AI is nothing new to us. But that tipping point in the last 6 months, I think the way you just summarised where we're at was amazing. It's probably the best explanation I've heard all year, Helena, so thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, right? I think some of the fundamentals in this mad rush of getting onto journey at the speed race of AI. Oh, we are missing the boat. Let's get onto that journey. I think we should not forget a good data governance is a key challenge and responsibility, and it's a foundational requirement. So whilst we keep focusing on the new and emerging tech at a jet speed space, really, we want to ensure that we have both capability for staff as well as technological safeguards to make sure that we enable and support this sort of new innovation and technology for the organization.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And Helena, there was a lot in there. And you're right, we could probably have a separate session just on generative AI, but I'm really, really curious on a couple of things. So maybe we can touch on them very briefly. You talked about from pilots to productionization. Is there a view in terms of how long is that runway, or is that really use case dependent? Do you have a view on that?
Look, I think that's shifting, right? Like we're seeing a mix of what we would call horizontal use cases. So the use cases that are common across most organisations, finance, HR, IT, those sorts of use cases, they're likely to get traction very quickly because they'll be adopted and they'll be able to be pulled across different industries in a really rapid fire way. So I'd say you'd get to production pretty quickly on those horizontals. I think the industry specific use cases where there's probably a little bit more experimentation that's going to go into the process will take longer to adopt. I'd reflect, I mean, the thin slice approach, I think, is really relevant here in terms of trying to get something to production and delivering sustained value rather than a point in time experiment that's fun to admire and good to sort of reflect on and learn from, but that doesn't really deliver sustained value.
Brilliant. Thanks, Helena. I'm mindful of time, and so we must come back to this at a subsequent topic or a webinar. Fawad, coming back to RegTechs. Now, I know that ATO and tax administrations in general may not directly refer to RegTechs in your work. You know, ATO works with a large number of digital platforms, software providers, intermediaries in that tax ecosystem. I also know that ATO maintains an API marketplace. You have done that for a large number of years, and with over 300 APIs. I guess just thinking about the audience, particularly on the RegTech stage here, talk to us about how you think of fintechs and RegTechs and their role as trusted intermediaries in a digital tax ecosystem. Where do they play in your mind?
It's a really interesting question because you're right, Saket. We've got a long, relationship, long-standing, very positive relationship, I might add, with digital software providers, super funds. There is a lot of data exchange, a lot of data ingestion across industry from many sources. At the heart of it, I think one of the best decisions our organisation made was to stand up the Digital Partnerships Office. I have wondered, whether the DPO itself, and it might be worthwhile inviting Ellie Stinchcombe, the Assistant Commissioner who looks after the DPO, along to one of these conversations, whether its role needs to consider reg and fintech. One of the things that I think we really need to be hyper aware of is the ethical paradigm. I'm constantly talking about ethics, especially in that fintech, RegTech space. What's the intent that you're starting out with? Is it ethical, right? I think that's something that you really want to ask yourselves. Are you doing something to beat the system or to complement the system, right? And if you look at in the DSP space, some of the large-scale digital software providers who are really at scale succeeding, they've become a part of the natural system of tax, right? And so when we develop a schema to ingest new data, then it becomes about, how do we partner, through the DPO and through our various business sponsors, the development of that schema. There's a co-design process. So you really want to, I would argue, if you're working with APRA and ASIC, how do we engage in a trusting co-design process? And ethics needs to be at the heart of that, because, you know, it's really interesting sometimes when you're on LinkedIn and you just see a new fintech or RegTech that's spun up, and often I wonder if they're thinking about that ethical paradigm. If you want the government to trust what you're building and help essentially proliferate the solution, you've got to be compliant and you've got to be helping driving compliance. So I think putting the end user experience at the heart, but also ensuring that it's quite ethical and it's, you know, the end user in the ecosystem of being a law-abiding citizen that's, you know, going to take away the regulatory and administrative burden of meeting your tax affairs, or, you know, whatever it is, whichever department you're working on or with. I think that's a really important paradigm that I often see missed. And it's really interesting when you see some really large scale use cases completely fall over, and the impact, right, to people's lives, mum and dad investors, that, you know, for me, I'm someone who truly believes in public service. That's why I'm here, right? And when I see things like that, and you get those headlines, oh, this celebrity's and backed this thing and it's gone down the drain or whatever it is, but you don't see that someone's lost their life savings over an investment, or, you know, something incorrect or inappropriate has occurred, and now people are getting penalties applied for leveraging a system that wasn't compliant, right? So I think there's something there to be said about that. The other is, you know, how we engage across government and industry, I think continues to mature, and we continue to make really positive steps towards that. If there's a desire to engage at that level, not sell, right, but discuss that end user paradigm and discuss, you know, how we want to shape society for the better, I think there's always avenues to have that discussion. You know, there's plenty of opportunity, like Darshil said, the Innovation Hub with ASIC or through the DPO at the ATO.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. Just reflecting on what you said there, engage, not sell. That's very, very useful advice. And I might just pivot to a question around this, and I'll go to both Darshil and yourself. In less than 30 seconds or so, what would be your advice to the RegTechs, the fintechs, the industry, when they think about engage, not sell to government? What are the do's and the don'ts that come to your mind? Fawad, do you want to start?
Yeah, look, as Helena was speaking, I just was writing some stuff down because, Helena, you seem really cool. We've got to catch up, I think. You know, I kind of summarized what she was saying in 5 points that I would say as a public servant that I can say. One is timing and capacity, to Helena's point, right? You've got to be precise with your timing and why you're there. If we're running a procurement, we're not going to talk to you, right? Also, if you're there to sell, we're not going to talk to you. Government does not engage in that way. Second of all, you know, behave ethically, right? It can't be engage via this channel, that channel, etc. Transparent engagement. I think someone's sharing screen, by the way. I'm not sure who that is.
I just noticed that too.
Yeah, but behaving ethically is really important. You know, and someone mentioned in the comments there a large use case. You know, there's questions around ethics. I'm not going to, you know, prescribe or presume to know what's actually happening there, but ethics is really important in how we engage. And through the front door, not back channels, right? One of the worst things I can tell you that I hate is when members of our organization come to me and say, oh, we met this tech and this guy, and for what, go buy me this. So, well, I'd rather talk to you about enterprise architecture and the business problem you want to solve, as opposed to technology or data, which is a latter part of that conversation, right? Follow procurement guidelines. We have Commonwealth procurement guidelines. My team then follow them to the T, and that's the only way we operate. And, you know, an extension of that, the final point is get on the appropriate panels, right? So we have the digital marketplace, the ICT apps panels. That's the way to engage, right? And once you're on, we can have an above board, transparent, well-governed conversation. That's the only kind of conversation I'm interested in.
Thank you, Fawad. That's very, very insightful. Darshil, did you want to weigh in on that?
Look, Fawad made all the right points because I resonate everything that he said, and I was making some points what he was saying. The only addition I would like to add there is that educate yourself about the agency you're dealing with. Government organizations are quite vast, and they have such a broad remit. So if you try to sell something, a retail shopping cart to a government organization, I'm not sure this is gonna fly. So it's important that you educate, and then show what's in for them. And how it can help in regulation. So that's critical before you start selling. So that sort of understanding is quite important on top of everything what Fawad said.
Fantastic, thank you. Just mindful of time, but like the generative AI topic, how I mentioned the webinar, we can't do justice to this without covering generative AI. Governance is another one of those topics. And I might go to Helena just very quickly. What comes to your mind around data governance, particularly when you think about large-scale transformation? What are some of the lessons learned from your perspective, and what could you share with the audience?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and it's a great topic that probably could not be more important in the current world. I guess when you've got availability of vast sources of data that are driving automation, which could be anything from automating vehicles on our roads to proposing a next best action for a customer interaction, or feeding into a Gen AI model of some other description. I think so. We've got access to more data, and certainly protecting that data is absolutely critical, but also increasingly needing to trust the data that was used to automate a service or an insight that we're then using to inform a decision or taking an action on. So my experience has been with say data governance frameworks. There's lots of them out there, and they're all pretty adequate. Many government agencies have their own data governance frameworks. There's Gartner, DMBOK, there's tech vendors bringing their own. All consultants have their own. They generally all cover the same elements: people, process, data, tech, with an emphasis on policies, standards, metrics, and some form of communication and decision making. So my experience and learning is it doesn't really matter which data governance framework you choose. It's all about how you contextualise and apply it within your organisational context, which I think, Darshil, is where you were getting to as well, and Fawad as well. Just give me something that's tailored and contextualised and makes sense for my organisation and what I'm trying to solve for. And I think with data governance, making it relevant in a project or program context, but then also, Saket, to your question around getting generative AI into production, how quickly can you get a data governance capability into your business as usual operations? I think the patterns that we see where data governance really sticks, because I think there's a problem with stickiness there. It's when it's attached to a really clear business problem. It's when there's very clear data ownership, and someone's head's on the chopping block, and often that's what drives someone being willing to champion an initiative, or there's someone who stands to benefit if you get the data governance side of it right. So there's a lot of considerations, with data governance, and I think the quicker that you can embed whatever your data governance trial is, I know we're short on time here, so I won't go through too many examples, but the quicker you can embed it into your operational processes, the more likely it is to be sticky, and less likely it is to be seen as an academic exercise that bears an administrative overhead.
Thank you, Helena. That's very, very useful. I have got the final signal here to wrap up. And so finally, what exactly does it take to become data-driven? And why is it so important in today's digital environment? What practical steps can an enterprise take to make data fundamental to its mindset and practices? What is the connection between data and that other priority that we talked a lot today on this panel? The other priority of digital age is business and technical agility, along with governance, ethical use of data analytics AI. Download the ebook through the link available in the event summary email, which you will all receive tomorrow, to find out how companies are using data to drive their businesses and connect the dots between becoming data-driven and agility, digital transformation, and continuous innovation. Thank you so much, panel, for the time. And to our audience, have a wonderful rest of the day, wherever you are. And many thanks to you for listening and for your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So just before we all leave the room, there was so much in that I almost don't even know where to start, except that one of the things that we talk about at the RegTech Association a lot is people. There's actually two facets of people. It's actually protecting people and consumers, and we all have our role to play there. But it's also actually about equipping people with the right tools to do the job. And so that's within organisations. How can people harness and get their hands on the right technology? And one of the other things that I loved, I heard the word not selling. Now, obviously, we represent a huge universe of people who have software to sell. But one of the great things that I think that we've created at the RegTech Association is an opportunity for us to have much more strategic conversations around RegTech deployment, rather than talking about sales first or knocking on doors. I think one of the colleagues just said something or other, he's only interested in X, Y, Z. And so it's actually about being able to understand each other and how to approach this. And that's one of the things that we are very excited to be able to host events exactly like this, to have these style of conversations. And just on, I heard lots of stuff about generative AI as well. I did see something very amusing that you might want to go and look at. They had the two male members of ABBA, recorded them a couple of days ago, and they asked ChatGPT to write an ABBA song. And I'll leave it to all of you to go and search that out on YouTube or somewhere to see what they thought about the results of the ABBA song that ChatGPT came up with. On the slide, I wanted to thank all of our speakers today. That was such a great conversation, very rich discussion. So thank you, Saket. Thank you to AWS, our sponsor for this session today, and to all the speakers. I also wanted to say that on the 5th and the 14th of June, I'm physically going to be in Amsterdam and London. And so if you have colleagues in both of those areas, do go onto our website, because you'll see the events that we are running there in both places to surface the opportunity that is RegTech without the sales. And then we will also be running one of our RegTech Edge programs digitally once again on the 22nd of June. So please do stay in touch with our events, because it's a great way to find out what we are all about. And so thank you once again for joining us today. And with that, I'll sign off now. And thank you all for being here. Thanks very much.